Welcome to Diary of a CIO. My name is Sam Ebrahim. I'm the Executive General Manager of New South Wales for Truku, a national recruitment business. The purpose of this podcast is that after close to 20 years in the technology industry, I've noticed there's a gap in the market. There's a lot of content online around technology, transformations, agile, cloud versus native, but there's not a lot of content around the story behind the job title. So I wanted to create a podcast that really delves into the individuals behind the title of CIO, understanding in terms of their journey, their challenges, how they build strong cultures, mindsets, etc. With that in mind, I'd love to welcome onto the episode Brett Wilson, who is currently the CIO of Australian Red Cross. I've known Brett for probably close to 3 to 4 years now, helped build his team out at Australian Red Cross, someone that I enjoy catching up with, not only professionally, but outside of work, just for beers and general chit chat. So with that in mind, I'd love to just offer the mic to Brett, just a bit of an intro in terms of your background and where you are today.
Thanks, Sam. Look, I've come from a consulting background and worked through a number of different industries beyond then, but I'm currently with the Australian Red Cross and we've just gone through a significant transformation and looking forward to the discussion today, really talking about leadership and how that transformation evolved.
Thank you, Brett. And again, the purpose of today's podcast individually is to really understand the mindset of the not-for-profit sector, really understand Brett's journey from the consulting world into where he is today and the reasons behind that. So with that in mind, I'd love to offer you the opportunity just to understand a little bit more about your current role at Australian Red Cross, the job title of CIO and what that means to Australian Red Cross, and also your journey over the last kind of 3 years or so until we are today.
So I started with Red Cross about 3.5 years ago, and it's been an interesting journey throughout that time where we've started as a very reactive team, but it also an organisation who didn't really value technology as a strategic enabler. Over that time, we've done a significant transformation where we've looked at technology and built those foundations and what we call the digital spine. And so on top of those foundations, over the last 18 months, we've designed and architected and built that and delivered that. And what that's given us is a foundation to build on as well. Red Cross is 110 years old. That means 110 years worth of potential legacy and older things that we had to deal with as well. So really unique organisation where we've got this legacy, but also we have a number of different industries that sit underneath the Australian Red Cross banner, which potentially is retail. We also do areas such as humanitarian support, disaster relief, and first aid and mental health training as well. So a very broad range of things that we do. And so it's not just, I think, one industry sort of where you look at one thing and we do one thing. It's a broad range of things as well.
Yes. And you mentioned an organisation that's 110 years old. So it's not a tech startup, agile, fast moving. How do you approach a transformation in an organisation that's 110 years old? What is your thought process around how you tackle that?
It was, how do we get the most amount of value, not chasing the new shiny thing? So looking at how do we get the most amount of value and how do we influence a board who's been around for a number of years who haven't really seen technology as an enabler, but I think because they hadn't really been taken on the journey. So it's about taking people on the journey to say, we're going to introduce this potentially business outcome rather than talking about the technology first. The technology is the underlying piece. The bit above the top was what are the benefits that we're going to get for our members or staff or volunteers? How do we react quicker potentially in an emergency or a disaster or something similar to that? So it was more about taking them on the journey rather than talking about the tech piece first.
And how do you, I speak to a lot of CIOs, particularly CDOs and CISOs, which are fairly new C-level titles in the technology space. And a lot of their role is selling the value of what they do to board members who may be very much non-technical and consume their knowledge of technology from the media or from their friends. How do you approach taking those type of people on the journey when they might not be as technology minded as other stakeholders in the business?
The key thing I think around that is framing the context for the individual instead of a bit of a cookie cutter approach where you would say, we're going to do this, it's going to cost $20 million and we're going to do this as an outcome. We were looking at a potential a CRM uplift. What does it mean to them? What's the value to them? And so the value to them is going to be we could potentially increase our donors. That means we can actually create more impact on the ground by increasing revenue. So I think it's reframing the context and the conversation to the individual rather than just the same generic sort of PowerPoint deck that you actually roll out each time as well.
And working in that sector, obviously coming from a consulting background, I suppose the outcomes you achieve, do you see the real world benefits when you talked around disaster relief and education. I mean, how does that affect you in terms of your drive and motivation?
I think for me, I mean, the reason I came to Red Cross was really to do something that I could look back on and be really proud of as well. And so what I look at as Red Cross and what I've done and what we've managed to achieve is nothing short of sort of an amazing opportunity where we've jumped in, we've done a transformation that was really hard. We've got everybody on board, but I think also is we've ended up with a really great result where it's not just a transformation from a digital perspective, it's a transformation as the organisation as a whole, the way we operate, looking at different processes and redefining the way we work potentially in an emergency or a disaster. What is the outcome of that? It means we're more efficient. It means we can respond in emergencies quicker. It means we're then using less funds to actually operate as well.
Okay. And from a mindset perspective, if you're building your mindset knowing that what you do every single day has a real world impact on the most needies of Australia, the people that need the help the most, how does that affect your mindset in terms of how you come to work and the people around you, taking them on the journey as well?
I think the key thing around that one is how do you still progress forward? But I think it's about being really mindful around what technology you put in place and who you take along on the journey. And I think for me, coming from sort of consulting and then construction and then to Red Cross, it was a really different mindset from where you were, which was about making money, obviously, for an organisation, to shifting to we're now providing impact to people on the ground. And so the better we can do and the better the people from an organisation perspective. But I think the main thing about bringing people on the journey is you've all got to come with that right mindset. So, which is how do we create a better environment in case we activate for an emergency or a disaster, but also how do we increase funds coming through from our other channels as well. Really great team around you, I think, is important, but all on that same journey and making sure that we're following the same path.
And that activation piece around disasters, how do you prepare for that? Obviously, with a lot of your education and support programs, you can plan that year, 2 years, 3 years in advance, have a good strategy around that. Disasters, very unpredictable. From an IT perspective, how do you prepare yourself for when a disaster hits that you are ready to support the business or organisation where it needs it?
We always run through a number of scenarios. So over the course of a year and we're moving into what's perceived as bushfire season or emergency season. So what we'll end up with is running through a number of scenarios that will actually give us some, I guess, better outcomes. So we look at things we can improve on. So for response time, we have a national operations centre down in Victoria. We run activating that. So we spin the whole environment up and we spin it back down. How do we improve? How do we make sure we get that incremental improvement? And I think it's not about the big things we're going to see now because we've been doing it for obviously a number of years. It's about the small incremental improvements where we might be able to deploy 500 volunteers in 24 hours across 55 evacuation centres. And so how do we do that quicker, more efficiently, and how do we make sure we can get on the ground actually producing more impact as quickly as possible?
And do you enjoy that pressure? I think coming from a consulting world, definitely levels of pressure there. I think Australian Red Cross and not-for-profit, definitely different types of pressure. How do they affect you, and which one how would you compare the two of them?
I think just very different. Where the pressure we're a reactive organisation, we react to external environment factors that we can't control, and so if you look at the pressure about spinning an operation up at a very short amount of time, if there was a disaster, the quicker we can get spun up, the quicker we can actually get on the ground. Whereas if you look, I think back to potentially in consulting, there was pressure around delivering as well, but I don't think the key component behind that was we're actually affecting people's lives in a positive way when we have activated and we're actually out on the field.
Yeah. And the people around you, I think I've placed quite a few people into your leadership team over the years, all very positive in terms of your leadership style. How do you build your mindset and your approach to, I suppose, dealing with those sort of scenarios to the people around you who may not be at the level that you are or coming from a similar background like consulting where you've had that diversity to build mindsets in different scenarios?
I think it's about making sure that they're really well supported. And so if we activate, everybody, it's all hands on decks. And so what that means is they're all there in their specific specialist roles. I can't do any of their roles individually, but I'm there to collectively help them make sure that they're there and they can do their jobs. But also I think the key thing is move the roadblocks out of the way. So as soon as they hit the issue as a roadblock, you can move them out of the way. And what that means is they're there freed up to actually do what they are really great at. And so from our side, what that means, or from my side, what that means is they can then actually get on and do their jobs rather than having to deal with someone over here who wants something totally different.
And I think one thing you said to me that really resonated with me over the years when I was working with you is that every dollar we spend on IT is $1 that we spend less on the people that really need our services. Operating that sort of environment, I mean, how do you operate and deliver the IT services that are needed in a very cost-centric environment?
It is about watching our pennies, very much so. And the key reason is, and it goes back to, I think, what I said before, which was how do we make sure we get the most amount of impact out of the money we spend as well? And so we're very considerate around what we spend. We went through the digital transformation, and we were very fortunate to get some funding from obviously the board to proceed with that. Now it's about making sure that we continue on that with the optimization and building on top of that, so to refine the organisation to make it more efficient. The other thing I think would be is, imagine if I walked into a board in a corporate organisation and said, I want $5 million to roll out some specific program. They're going to look at what's that return on investment, which is a dollar figure. Whereas if I go into the board for Red Cross and say I want $5 million for the same outcome, they're going to say, well, we have to take it away from doing something in the community for you to do that. So I think it's about being really mindful on what we are spending money on, and looking at the impact as well. So what's that benefit realization? How do you do that cost benefit analysis to say there is going to be a huge uplift if we actually go and look at this? And that looks at emerging technologies as well. So obviously AI is in there at the moment and everyone's talking about AI. What does that mean for us? How are we going to get the benefits out of it? So we are looking across the board around what are the things potentially we could roll out, but being very mindful around we only have a limited amount of funding that we can spend.
Yep. And from an organisation perspective, how would you describe the stakeholders in a not-for-profit compared to the more commercial world? And what is your approach to dealing with those different types of stakeholders to take them on the journey?
I think you'd be surprised now, a lot of not-for-profits have some really great commercially minded people. Because I think there's been a bit of a shift where probably not-for-profits weren't the organisation to go and work for because they weren't really forward-thinking. But I think now, as a lot of people have realised that maybe working for a large corporate or a private entity is, after a period of time, it does wane a little bit. So you need a bit of a break away from sort of that environment, and shifting into a not-for-profit, you actually come in and actually realise you do some really great stuff. So the mindset I think is stop again. The mindset I think has changed where we've ended up with some really great corporate-minded individuals across the organisation in junior roles up to sort of senior roles as well. That enables an easier sort of telling of the story, because what it means is they really understand already what the benefits can be because they've seen it in a corporate organisation. Yeah. But I think if you've got a lot of people who have been there for quite some time as well. And I think for them, it's taking them through that change journey. What is it going to mean for them when we actually do something? So in other words, you used to do it this way. We're going to be able to do it this way. It's going to free up half of your time. So half of the time that you would have spent doing some admin work over here with the new technology, we will end up doing something far more valuable as well.
I think it's important to remember that not-for-profits aren't or shouldn't be stigmatized with we're just a charitable organization. They are commercial entities, but the commercial aspect of it is that everything they produce goes back into the purpose of who they are as an organization, as opposed to shareholders and dividends. So I think that commercial mindset, bringing it to NFPs, people like yourself who've come from commercial backgrounds and decided to take that journey into the NFP world, we're seeing a significant uplift in terms of how they operate and the services they deliver as well. So that's really good to know. What about leadership? Obviously, placing people into your team, like what would you describe as a good leader, and how do you define like your leadership style for the people underneath you?
I might answer the second question first. So I think my leadership style is, I'm not here to do someone's role. They are far more experienced in that specific specialist role than I am, but I'm here to move the roadblocks out of the way and make you feel really supported around you can achieve whatever it is that's thrown at you. In terms of probably what my team would think and what I expect of them is I have high expectations. if I bring you in to do a specific role, I need you to be able to potentially go and do it, but very well supported from me as well. My leadership team, I've got a great leadership team in there now. I know they can go out and work independently, and I will trust them in the decisions that they make. If there's something that I don't necessarily agree with, it might be a slightly different process in the way that I would do it. We have a conversation separately behind closed doors just to understand for me around what were the different ways of potentially doing things. So I'm not then potentially going back and having a conversation in front of everybody else and berating them, because I really want to feel for them to feel empowered.
Yeah.
And I want to make sure that we end up with a really great leadership team who can go out and do things on the ground as well.
Yeah. I think for me, I love coaching. I love leading people. It's one of my passions and what drew me to my new role within Truku. I always think back to my stages of my career, and I've had some fantastic leaders. I've also had some not so great leaders as well. And I always think about the qualities of a good leader and try and apply those to my leadership. Without naming names, can you think of, the best leader you've had throughout your career, and what did they give you that kind of really inspired you to become a leader in the future?
Great question. Without naming names, I think the key thing that I think of is feeling supported, but also feeling supported where you can feel vulnerable as well. And you can ask those questions where normally in front of a potentially a peer or a boss, something like that, you might not feel comfortable in asking a really vulnerable question like, you know what, I really don't know that, or I need a hand with this. I think that's probably the key piece of advice, is find that person who you can feel vulnerable with as well, whether it's a peer, whether it's your boss. You need to make sure that you've got the opportunity to have those conversations. Because if you don't have those conversations, you can't speak openly, you'll end up with the same view that you had potentially from another operation. Or, I don't know what I was talking about there. I just veered off in another direction. Let's go back to it. Where did we hear up to?
So talk about the good leader you had in your career and what you gained from them.
Yeah, I was trying not to actually talk about a name. Then that's why I ended up veering off in a direction. I think for me, look, the key leadership moment in my career was from an individual who said to me, "You've got to feel vulnerable. If you can feel vulnerable in front of me or potentially one of your peers or someone outside of the organisation, it means that then you're accepting that diversity of view. Because one, you're being vulnerable to say, look, I really don't know what I'm doing here, or I need a hand. But on the other hand is you're accepting their views. And it is hard sometimes to accept a conflicting view around what you're actually thinking and what you might be thinking as an outcome as well.
I agree 100%. And for me, like as a leader, every person I've led throughout my career, they're different motivations, different fears, different strengths, different weaknesses. And I think, as you mentioned, applying a cookie cutter approach to stakeholders doesn't work. But for me, applying a cookie cutter approach to leadership doesn't. So I think it's adapting your style towards what individuals need, as opposed to expecting everyone to adapt how they operate to you as well. What about in terms of, I suppose, environments where maybe your team aren't used to the environment you're operating in? So if you're bringing people in from the commercial world, which I know for a fact that we've placed people into your team for commercial and they've all succeeded. How do you lead people in a different environment and get them to adapt their style to the business and what the business needs in what it may be a very different environment?
Oh, that's a really good one. I think it's about, as I mentioned a minute ago, it's about in making sure that they understand they can be vulnerable and turn around and say, look, I don't know what I'm actually doing here, or this is such a different environment to what I'm used to working in. And if you come from a private or a corporate environment and you come into Red Cross, there are very much different areas that you would not have been exposed to when you're in one of the other entities. And just thinking along the lines of an activation, a really good example. We run through scenarios and you get people who come from a corporate background who really don't understand what it's like to go through an activation. And you've got people's lives on the lines, and whether in a corporate organisation you generally don't have those. Where I like to lead from there is getting everybody up front and saying, look, here's where we are. We've got an open forum. Let's make sure that everyone is comfortable around what we're actually doing. But then I think also is supporting them from behind as well as sometimes leading from them in front. Because sometimes I feel like you've got to take them on that journey for them to let them go, and then they can actually go off and do their own thing. Yeah, I
agree. What about obviously managing? And something I've learned over the more recent years is the importance of managing up as well. So in terms of the types of people you reported into, what advice would you give listeners who are maybe new into a CIO roles or significant leadership roles where managing upwards and sideways is just as important as managing down? What tips would you give those?
I think it varies on the individual. So if you're reporting into the CFO, they're interested in, is there a financial benefit in a positive or negative way, but also what's the value out of it? If you're reporting into maybe a COO, they're more going to potentially look at risk. And then if you're reporting into a CEO, then I think it's the whole gamut. You need to think about everything. I think across the board, though, is make sure you're actually not talking about from a technical perspective. You're talking about what are the outcomes, what are the business outcomes, what's the business going to get, what are the perceived benefits. If you can talk to those in a real way, then you're probably going to get a lot across the line faster than turning around and saying, we're going to put a new CRM system in and it's going to be fantastic and it's going to give us data duplication, and everyone's eyes have glazed over by the time you've actually gone through the second sentence. Yeah. So it's for framing the conversation to the individual, but also thinking around what's their drivers, what's their motivators that you actually need to make sure they understand what the benefit of what you're going to do is.
Yeah, that's great advice. And now I think that one of your attractions to working for the Australian Red Cross is actually a bit of a personal story to you. So I'd love you to share with the listeners around what that story is and I suppose the purpose behind you joining Australian Red Cross.
Yeah, so back in 2020, my auntie who lived up north, her farm was surrounded by bushfires, and she took a photo of as she was driving out, which was the whole farm effectively on fire. Now, at that point in time, I set up an initiative with our local community called Caravans for Bushfires, and what we ended up doing is finding a small suburb called Quorma, which is down south of Sydney. And we supplied 16 donated caravans. So we managed to find people who donate caravans and we stocked them up. We found out who they were going to. So 16 displaced families, we managed to sort out, obviously, somewhere where they could stay and sleep. But also if they had kids, we got clothes for the specific kids and their sizes as well. So that was where, for me, it was one of those moments where you go, you know what? I really could do something a little bit different to what I'm doing at this point in time. And the opportunity came up with Red Cross. And I thought, wow, what an amazing opportunity. One, to work for a really great organisation who's been around for a long time. But also the second piece is make sure that I can leverage off my skill set and my experience and overlay it across Red Cross to produce a really great outcome for their transformation.
Yeah, well, I think for me, purpose is incredibly important. When I sit down with the CIOs or any significant leaders in the business world and we're talking around career advice, I always try and rein it back in before we talk about the job and talk about salary and companies. It's like, what's important to you? And it could be their family. It could be like you've been through an experience in your personal life that you realigned your purpose or drivers, but just understanding what that purpose looks like. And it could be related to something in your personal life. It could be I want to grow, I want the ability to do an MBA, but understanding people's purpose and then using that to align to a particular job or to a particular industry or a particular job type is really, really important. Do you think if you didn't have that event in 2020 that you would have had that moment? Is it something that's, I suppose, you might call fate? Or what are your thoughts on how that might have affected you if that hadn't happened?
Yeah, look, for me, I think there was always a connection into Red Cross. And my mum found a photo the other day where I had a junior Red Cross little badge on, and it was from when I was in primary school. And I'm still trying to find the original detail around that one, but there was always a connection into Red Cross. Always donated from a blood perspective. I think it's from early age as well. So would I have ended up in the same result? Probably. I think sometimes you need a bit of a break from a career perspective as well to really go back to your roots and think about what is the purpose that you're actually on here for. And for me, I think it was one of those things that I had an opportunity. And whether it was Red Cross or it might have been another NFP at that point in time, I think I had a bit of a mindset change that I needed to do something different where I could actually produce something that created impact. And I think I've found Red Cross, and that was an amazing opportunity for me as well.
Yeah, I think in my opinion, it takes sometimes a dramatic event to kind of people realize their purpose. And I think, the biggest dramatic event that we've experienced recently will probably be COVID. And I don't like still talking about it because it's many years ago now. But I think the pre-COVID, the draw to financial services and banking was like really that's where a lot of people wanted to go. And that industry is still booming. And there's absolutely a great industry to be in. But I think a lot of people reevaluated what was important to them, and having that tangible, real world outcome where you can see the fruits of your labor and you can see the impact you're having. We get a lot of people these days who are happy to not chase the money or not chase promotions or not chase whatever it might be. And for them, their purpose and the outcomes that their jobs bring to the community or the wider Australia or the world is really, really important. So that's, I think that resonates with a lot of the people that will be listening to this podcast today. Is there any advice that you would give to someone who maybe is in the commercial world and potentially looking to join a NFP or a purpose-driven organization? What advice would you give someone from the outside in terms of preparing them to take that journey, or advice around securing a position within an NFP?
I think you'd be quite surprised on the talent that is actually inside a lot of NFPs. They're kind of a bit of a quiet achiever. They don't like sort of boasting around the things they do, but the talent you would actually find within a lot of NFPs is quite surprising in a positive way. And to gear yourself up, I think, is really looking back, and we spoke about it before, around what is the purpose? Why do you want to go and work for an NFP? Is it you want to think about what is my purpose? How am I going to create impact? Or is it on the other side to think, you know what, I've had a bit of enough of corporate for a period of time. I want to go and actually do something different that actually matters. And I think there's no right or wrong answer there, but I think think beyond your sort of stigma around charities or NFPs and they don't do anything. We are a really great example of how we've done a digital transformation, we've done an operating model change and an organisational structure change as well over the last 18 months. And if we can do it as a charity, every other charity potentially can do it as well. But so corporates should be doing the same thing. They should be looking at how they operate, how do they become more efficient, and then you become that almost iterative approach where you continue to evolve, looking forward and making sure that you are looking at emerging technologies in the right way rather than the shiny new thing that sort of bounces down the road.
Yeah, I think anyone who's listened to the podcast and think working for an NFP is an easy ride and short working days, I think we can definitely dispel that myth. I think the amount of time that we've spoken or trying to get time in a diary to speak to you, and we end up speaking at 7 or 8 o'clock at night, or even texting at the weekend, I can definitely testify that working for an NFP, you do work hard. With that in mind, I think balancing work and life and making sure that you're giving yourself as much support that you need, whilst obviously supporting the wider community through your job. What tips do you give people in terms of separating work life with outside of work activities and family and children and pets and things that are actually good for you as a person? Drawing that boundary in, drawing that line, how do you do that, if at all? And if you don't, what tips would you give people to maybe draw that line?
I think sometimes I do it well, and sometimes I look back thinking, you know what, I really didn't do well at that time. I think it's important. I mean, mine sort of blend together, and it works for me, but I think it's up to the individual as well. I do like going for walks, and we'll take the dog for a walk in the morning before sort of work, and then grab a coffee, spend time with the kids on the weekend. But I think it's finding that sweet spot to make sure that you're happy with the amount of time you're spending at work and happy with the amount of time that you spend on what you're doing at home. I kind of like a bit of peace and quiet in the morning, so I've got a couple of teenage girls, so I get that peace and quiet in the morning, whereas I've got other friends who are more adapt to working more late at night time, so that kind of works for them as well. It is a bit of a balance, finding both, but I think the key thing I probably would say here is make sure you go out and actually spend a bit of time on yourself in development as well, and go out and move around. Exercise is one of those forms where you have a walking meeting and you get so much more productivity out of that walking meeting because your mind is actually more active as well. Sitting in front of a screen for 8 hours a day isn't great for anyone, and I think it's that ability to pop out, go for a walk, have a conversation with a colleague, so have that 30 minutes of walking meeting as well. I think it's really important to find that balance between working and sitting there for an 8-hour day and jumping up and going for a walk, to potentially working all weekend as well. But sometimes you have to do it. And you mentioned before about, yes, we do work pretty hard, obviously, at within Red Cross as well, because I think we're looking at what's the best outcome we can actually produce. And sometimes you have to work a bit more and sometimes it's a bit less, and it kind of works out in the wash. But I would strongly say your health and well-being is the most important thing to you, and you need to make sure you prioritize that as well.
Yeah. And so you talked about kind of growth there and development. For me, like there's lots of activities I do that I really enjoy in my role as well, like leadership, coaching, strategy, branding, marketing, all of that, trying to bring it together and kind of focus on that to help grow and develop the business and grow the people around you. As a CIO, like fundamentally your role is quite similar from one organization to the other. So when you talk around self-development and learnings, how do you identify what you need to self-develop and learn? And how do you, I suppose, come outside of your comfort zone and grow, knowing that I suppose a CIO function is fairly similar in organizations?
I think the roles changed though. The roles significantly changed over the last sort of 5 years. Prior to 5 years ago, maybe 10 years as well, is a CIO was one of those people that kind of sat in the corner with their tech team and they were a cost center. Now, if you look at every organization, is without technology, they would not function. So the CIO now has a seat at the table. And that's a great thing.
Yep.
But it's also one of these things about careful what you ask for as well, because now the expectation is the CIO is going to be able to go in there and market themselves. The CIO is going to potentially go in there and what's the risk associated with doing something as well. They're going to look at the financial. What does that view look like? What's that return on investment? It's changed that significantly. Whereas, and I think the development piece for CIOs is from a broad perspective. You can't just pick one or two things. My recommendation would be to go out and potentially, if you haven't, is go and do an MBA. So you have that really broad experience of marketing, around budgeting, around finance, around risk. Make sure, though, you keep in touch with the broader sort of emerging trends. Whether it's you sign up to Financial Times and you kind of look in there or something else. I think it'd be really important to make sure that you do keep up. Make sure you set aside a little bit of time each week, maybe an hour, to go and spend looking at what are the themes that are coming through as well.
Yeah. And you mentioned earlier, just a second ago, around kind of what you do outside of work. What's your main passions and hobbies outside of your family?
I have a little boat, so like to go out, and it's a bit cold at the moment, but like to go out and spend some time out on the water. That completely disconnects you from everything. And do
you leave your phone at home, or do you take it with you?
No, somewhere where we go. Well, the phone generally goes into a little bag, and then don't touch the bag.
Yeah.
So that's one good thing. Try a bit of fishing, but not really successful at that. The other one is trying to get back into a bit of exercise for me, which is my plan is over the next 12 months is to go and do a half marathon. So that's my goal at the moment. So really important to have obviously goals that you're working towards, but don't be dissatisfied if you potentially don't get to it on the same time. Just keep going until you do.
Yep.
So I think probably, and I do need to spend a bit more time on myself and making sure that I develop sort of myself as well. I'm not getting any younger. And so I want to be around for sort of my kids and my kids' kids.
Yeah.
And so I think it is important about finding those hobbies outside of work that you can completely go and disconnect. And what I've found is sometimes is when I'm working through a problem potentially at home, I might actually think about a work problem, might be able to solve that. For some reason, the two kind of gel together as well.
Yeah. And you mentioned setting yourself goals for like personal achievements like running a half marathon. In the business world, you're held to account by outcomes by the business and by stakeholders. How do you hold yourself to account to get up in the morning and go for a run, or to take the dog for a walk, or get out on the boat? And when you've got busy stuff going on in your life, what's your approach to holding yourself to account for the outside of work activities?
Probably the easiest answer to that one is, if I don't look after myself, I'm not going to be able to go and do those other things. The things that take a long time and a lot of intense sort of thought and understanding around what do I need to produce as an outcome here. If I'm not well and I'm not at my best, I'm not going to be able to produce the best thing that I can in the organisation.
Yeah, okay. I'm very similar-minded. I think I very rarely work from early in the morning till late at night without some sort of break. And that break could be go to the gym, do a HIIT class, take my dog for a walk, finish work and go and cook a nice dinner and relax and go for a walk and then get back into work. And I find my productivity, my focus and the outcomes I achieve are much better when you have a broken up day with activities outside of work in between and then kind of go back. And that could be my mindset in terms of working in short stints and focus. But I think having outside activities to break up your day or break up your week and give you that mental gap is really, really important. Do you separate yourself from technology as much as possible when not working? I know it's hard to do these days, but is that something you find important?
So we have the rule in our house around there's no phones in the bedrooms at nighttime when you sleep.
Okay.
And so that's myself and my wife.
So do you have an old school alarm clock, or how do you...
I have an old school alarm clock, and that works really well. And try and disconnect. Look, I mean, technology is so pervasive now. I think we're one of the most connected generations than there's ever been, and we're producing so much data. So you have to disconnect a little bit every so often, I think, to really reflect around what you've been doing, and it gives you the opportunity to clear some space out of your head as well. And I was just thinking back to an old CEO that I used to work for, and 3 times a week at lunchtime during the week, he would block aside an hour and a half. He would go to the gym. It was non-negotiable. There was nothing going over that period of time. And I think it's important that is a really, from a role model perspective, it sort of taught me how important that wellness piece is. And he disconnected for an hour and a half, came back and he was all refreshed. And then he could work for another several hours after that. So it worked really well for him. And that's sort of, I guess, probably the suggestion that I would make around making sure you do set aside that time and make sure you end up with a really great result where you can kind of disconnect for a period of time and then go back to it.
And recent legislation around the right to switch off, obviously very current in the media over the last couple of months or so. What are your thoughts on that legislation in terms of the value of it, also the practicality of it as well?
Looking at it from a Red Cross perspective, I'll start with is, we're generally it's sort of a 9 to 5 sort of work day, and then people will come in before that and come in after that as well. If we activate though, it becomes a 24/7 operation. So it's a little bit difficult and harder than an organisation that you would normally get in a corporate world. And so I think for the right to disconnect during that period of time, you don't want to burn people out. If you burn people out, we could potentially put lives at risk. Whereas I think we'll end up with somewhere in the middle where I want to make sure that people have the right to disconnect, but we've got to make sure that we can continue on operations if we activate through an emergency as well. So yeah. I think it's a good legislation coming through. I'm probably seeing there might be a couple of iterations of it over the next couple of years to make it a little bit more refined than what it is right now. But I think it's fairly clear as if you can't be contacting staff outside of work on a continual basis.
Yeah, I agree. I think particularly in recruitment, like you can get very busy at times, and sometimes you just need to kind of get your head down and work when needed, and I'm happy to do that. But other times, more than happy to take a more relaxed approach. And I think health, well-being, mental health is really, really important. I'm a big advocate for that. But I think it was also important to understand that when things are busy, that shouldn't be the norm. It's not every day, it's occasionally, and people are happy to do that as well.
Yep.
Thank you for listening to today's episode. It's been a great pleasure talking to Brett Wilson today. It's been very enjoyable as always. I think some key takeaways from today's podcast is really about the value of purpose, really about aligning what's important to you, to your career, building a strong mindset for yourself, people around you, and also some really good tips on how to be a good leader. So thank you, Brett. Before we go, just as always, if you met a younger Brett earlier in their career, what is the one bit of advice that you would give yourself that you wish you had learned today?
It's probably something that I actually live by now, which is around don't let perfection get in the way of progress, because you can continue to iterate on top of progress. But if you wait for perfection, you'll end up with not delivering something. And then the kind of question is, how much benefit has that been as well?
Yeah, perfect. Thank you so much. For everyone listening, thank you so much for your time. If you could please like, comment and share, and look forward to our next episode in the series. Thank you.